It's a particularly acute challenge because it's not only a set of PRC ambitions strategically as they become more powerful and try to regain the glories of decades and centuries past, but we now add to this a question of sovereignty, which are always very, very difficult issues to manage. So we're hoping first speaker to come and join us for that for the inaugural TSDP talk. And Alan Romberg, a friend to everybody in this room, or most everybody in this room, will be talking about cross-strait relations after the 19th Party Congress. Alan is a distinguished fellow and the director of the East Asia program at Stimson Center. Before joining Stimson in 2000, he had a distinguished career working on Asian issues for some 27 years in the Department of State, and 2 decades of that, 20 years of that, was as a Foreign Service officer. His assignments with the Department of State included Principal Deputy Director of the State Department's Policy and Planning Staff, which sets strategy and looks at long-term policy, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, and was the Deputy Spokesman for a period of time for the Department of State. A really fun job to have. In various capacities in dealing with East Asia, Director of the Office of Japanese Affairs, member of the Policy Planning Staff for East Asia, staff member at the National Security Council for China, and he served overseas in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Another 10 years as well as the C.V. Starr Senior Fellow for Asian Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Add to that mix, Special Assistant for the Secretary of the Navy. Alan Romberg has seen our Asia policy from the inside in Washington, D.C., whether it's the Department of State, at the White House, the National Security Council, whether it's at the Pentagon with the Navy staff. And he's also shaped Asian policy from Asia itself, and in addition to that, as I've outlined, with fantastic assignments in think tanks where he's also remained then in the world of the academy, helping to influence in a very positive way U.S. policy towards Asia. Alan has a master's degree from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. And rather than try to tee up this talk and context right now for the 19th Party context, I'm going to go straight away to you, Alan, who can do that much better than me. And after your remarks, we're going to then continue on with the conversation among ourselves here. And Alan, attribution, non-attribution?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, attribution it is. Okay, Alan.
Carl, thank you very much, and thank you, Larry and Harris, for the arrangements. Very nice to see you both here. Thank you very much for the arrangements. Can you hear me in the back? I asked for microphones. You're okay? If you have any problem, let me know and I'll turn this thing on. Otherwise, I'll stay without it. Sorry about Palo Alto's bus or taxi system. I will not take responsibility. I'm not going to talk at you for too long because I think what I would like to do is tee up where we are, a little bit of how we got here, some of the factors that I see going forward, and then really turn it over to you all who have long and deep knowledge and strong views, I think, in many cases, about the issues that are on the plate today for cross-strait relations, and including, by the way, the United States. I'm not just saying the 2 parties across the strait. I think the U.S. is an integral player in this. So first, I think we need to review where we have been in this relationship and why. At least this is all obviously my own view. And it also might be helpful to recall where some people going into the 19th Party Congress had predicted we would end up, and then match that up with where we are, or where we anyway may seem to be. I want to take, as I say, not only into account the interests of the three major players as I've identified them here, but also at least to touch on and give you the opportunity to draw in, to the extent you want, larger issues in the region. For example, I don't think Taiwan and cross-strait relations exist in a vacuum, even within the region. How they fit in, I'm sure there are differences about. But I think that it's important to have that sort of context in mind. I think we're all familiar with the broad dimensions of the stagnating, I would even say deteriorating, cross-strait relationship since President Tsai Ing-wen took office last May, some almost 18 months ago. For whatever reason, and I'd be interested in your own thinking, I have some ideas, and with Xi Jinping's personal involvement, very deep involvement, enormous emphasis has been placed on getting her to directly and unambiguously embrace the, quote, common political foundation that was identified as the 1992 consensus, and with increasing clarity and emphasis been defined to mean the, quote, core connotation that both Taiwan and the mainland belong to one and the same China. Xi Jinping had even taken what I think was a pretty noteworthy step to meet with Ma Ying-jeou toward the end of his tenure to reinforce that point. I think that was the main reason he met with Ma, was to drive home the centrality of the 1992 consensus as an accepted position by the authorities on both sides, not just some sort of party-to-party deal back in 1992. And in fact, I have to say that I think Tsai Ing-wen has more or less accepted that the meetings were not just between parties. But in any case, it's had an extraordinary, played an extraordinary role in this dynamic that we have seen over the last year and a half. While Tsai did not, and in my view, not only could not, but will not do this, that is, she will not embrace in a mantra-like fashion one China, to which Taiwan and the mainland both belong. I think the fact is she's actually gone very far to adopt the bases, including agreements and outcomes, of the 1992 meetings and what has followed on in cross-strait relations as mainstays of her administration's policy. So in that sense, I'd go as far as to say that while she refused to endorse one China in a direct, unambiguous way that Beijing has insisted, in fact, her policy in most practical ways has been a one China policy. I'll get into the question a little bit, mainly to open it up to you, without going into great detail, about whether she is seeking to promote soft or cultural independence, as many in the mainland expressed concern about. But I think very few people outside of some mainland academic circles believe she will actually strive for what we call legal or de jure independence, or that people in Taiwan would support her if she did. After all, she was elected on a platform of maintaining the status quo in cross-strait relations, not disrupting it. In the face of the adamant PRC position on her accepting one China in order to return to circumstances of dialogue and what you might call the status quo ante, that is, before Beijing cut all the high-level dialogues, blocked Taiwan in intergovernmental organizations such as the WHA or ICAO or Interpol, even in non-governmental organizations in many respects, inhibited Taiwan's participation both in bilateral and regional economic arrangements, ratcheted up military exercises, not within a very close proximity, but nonetheless noteworthily close, and so on. In my view, she was trying, and to some extent we'll see how far she's still going, with two basic approaches. One was to hold to the belief that after the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping might be amenable to adjusting his approach, not abandoning one China. Clearly that was never feasible. But rather to try to find another way forward that addressed Beijing's core concern, not to frontally challenge sovereignty or territorial integrity, even while not endorsing the mainland's position in a direct way. Now, to some extent, this has become wrapped up in Tsai's repeated calls for a, quote, new model of cross-strait interaction. Keep in mind that at least part of the model that Beijing has endorsed is that in her inaugural address, she went some way to meeting their concerns, but she did not submit what they call a complete answer sheet. I've spent a lot of time talking with my PRC colleagues about that. I consider that a somewhat arrogant position. They say, well, this is culturally specific to China and nothing unusual. But in any case, that was the model, that she had to come back and fulfill the requirements of the answer sheet. But generally speaking, in response to this call for a new model, in fact, Beijing has largely dismissed it, saying that the problem is not the model. The problem is the substance. Xi Jinping seemed to drive this home in the remarks he delivered at the 19th Party Congress, where he spent a great deal of time emphasizing the importance of the 92 communique. Consensus. However, whether this in the end might produce something more constructive may depend on the second element that I see her having pursued, that I mentioned, and that is reference she first made in her inaugural address in May 2016, and repeated most recently in her response, if you will, to Xi Jinping a couple of days ago, with the idea of doing away with historical baggage. For those of you unfortunate enough to follow my writings in the China Leadership Monitor, China Leadership Monitor is a wonderful publication put out by Hoover and edited by your extremely capable colleague, Alice Miller, who couldn't be here this afternoon. But I have a niche, and my niche is cross-strait relations of the same scope that I'm talking about today. I have associated that phrase, that is, doing away with historical baggage, with the DPP's advocacy, or active advocacy, of Taiwan independence. I believe at the time she mentioned it, in May 2016, she was making reference to the possibility of doing something about what's called the Taidu Dangang, the Taiwan independence claim. Not immediately, but as a prospective way of getting at the issue without embracing a one China mantra. That doesn't mean, I think, by the way, that Tsai would abandon the dream of eventual independence or reject it. But it is, after all, not a practical goal. And as shown, this is shown by the fact that, at least according to what I consider to be the most reliable polls in Taiwan, less than a quarter of respondents support it, either immediately or after a period of maintaining what one might call the status quo. Even the DPP chairman, former chairman, Su Zhenchan, said Taiwan independence is a matter for academic study. So it isn't exactly a revolutionary position, whatever the dream may be, to say that as a practical policy, it is not on. And when one examines PRC statements by Xi Jinping and other leaders, but especially Xi,